I first became interested in the possibility of a lost civilization after reading a most extraordinary book that was published in the 1960s called Hamlet's Mill. And that book was written by a professor of the history of science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Giorgio de Santillana. And it was co-authored by Hertha von Deschend, who was professor of the history of science at the University of Frankfurt. And what they demonstrated in that book, at enormous length, I mean, really, the evidence base is very, very, very solid, is extremely ancient knowledge of a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. And the precession of the equinoxes is actually a result of a wobble on the axis of the Earth. And because the Earth is the viewing platform from which we observe the stars and the sun and the cosmos that surrounds us, changes in its orientation change the positions and the rising times of particular stars and the constellations against the background of which the sun rises on the spring equinox. And that's why we have this notion of, we live in the age of Pisces. What does that mean? It means that at dawn on the spring equinox, 21st of March in the Northern Hemisphere, the sun rises against the background of the constellation of Pisces. And everybody's heard the song, "We Live in the Dawning of the Age of Aquarius." That's because within the next 150 years, the sun will have completed its journey through the constellation of Pisces and will enter the constellation of Aquarius on the equinox. So that it will be the age of Aquarius. Back at the time of the early Christians, that's when the constellation of Pisces first began to house the sun. It's not an accident that the early Christians used the fish as their symbol. Before that, it was the constellation of Aries. Go to ancient Egypt, you will find ram symbolism predominant at that time. Go back earlier, it's the age of Taurus. Eventually, you get back to the age of Leo, around 12,000 years ago. At which time, at dawn on the spring equinox, the lion-bodied Great Sphinx would have gazed exactly at its celestial counterpart, the constellation of Leo, housing the sun on the spring equinox. This phenomenon takes place at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. It takes 25,920 years to complete it, a whole cycle. If you imagine the North Pole of the Earth extended into space, at the moment, our pole star is Polaris. That's because the extended North Pole of the Earth is pointing most directly, not exactly at, but very closely at Polaris. But it will not always point at Polaris, and it has not always pointed at Polaris. There was a time when Thuban in the constellation of Draco was the pole star, because of that wobble on the axis of the Earth that is causing the pole to make a great circle in the skies, and at the same time it's having these effects on the zodiacal constellations at the equinox. To cut a long story short, Hamlet's Mill documents in extraordinary detail vast knowledge of the precession of the equinox, encoded in symbolism and in numbers all around the world. And those numbers are all multiples of the number 72. So I couldn't help noticing that the Great Pyramid also responds to that system. If you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, which itself is a multiple of 72, it's 600 times 72, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by the same precessional number, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. This is thought to be coincidental by Egyptologists, but I don't think it's a coincidence at all. I think it's another example of that system of ideas that was first encapsulated by Santillana and von Deschend. If the scale was different, I would be less impressed. But here we have a monument that is aligned to within 3/60ths of a single degree of true north, despite the fact that it has a 13-acre footprint, that it weighs 6 million tons, that it's 481 feet high. They managed to align it within 3/60ths of a single degree of true north. That tells us that it's connected to the Earth, to a key place on the Earth, and then its scale, its size, uses precession of the equinoxes, unfolding at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years to give a scale. If it was 1 to 57,420, I wouldn't be impressed. But because it's 1 to 43,200, I'm very impressed indeed. That tells us that they're giving us the dimensions of the Earth on a scale defined by the Earth itself. by a key motion of the Earth, which is the precession of its axis. So it was this knowledge of the cosmos, this knowledge of the key motions of the Earth, expressed in ancient mythology, going back to the Rig Veda, going back before that. That's really what set me on this track. That we have a civilization that had invested hundreds of years in making very detailed observations of the heavens, scientific observations, and then had expressed those observations in symbolism and in numbers, and had passed them down to the future. This isn't building motor cars, it's not sending rockets to the moon, it's not doing the kind of hardware stuff that we do, but it's scientific software that we're looking at in this ancient system of ideas. And I believe that we are likely to be looking at a civilization that regarded its place in the cosmos as sacred, that regarded the cosmos itself as sacred, and that set about to understand the cosmos and the way that it works in a level and to a depth that archaeologists does not normally attribute to hunter-gatherer civilizations of the Ice Age.
They may defend their views for whatever reasons, maybe really trivial, even dull reasons, because that's what they've been doing and it's hard to change. But how would our understanding of humans today and the future human change if we adopt your take on ancient apocalypse? Well, what changes? What are the consequences?
I think the key consequence is the misapplication of evolutionary theory to social development. There's a tendency, and it's very much reinforced by archaeology, to see our civilization today as the apex and the pinnacle of human achievement. That the whole human story has been about producing this incredibly advanced, sophisticated, technological civilization that controls much of the world in the 21st century. The perspective I'm trying to propose, that we've missed a whole episode of the human story, that there may have been an episode of what we would recognize as an advanced civilization, not identical to our own, but with advanced and sophisticated knowledge that requires centuries to build up, that there may have been such a civilization during the Ice Age. This then removes from us our place on the pinnacle of human achievement. We're just part of a story that, with ups and downs, that civilizations can exist and can be completely destroyed. I mean, archaeologists know this. The Indus Valley civilization was unknown until the 1920s, when it was accidentally discovered while a railway was being built. To this day, we cannot read the script of the Indus Valley civilization, even though they had a script. So civilizations do get lost. And the argument that a civilization may have got lost, that we've forgotten an important episode in the human story during that cataclysmic event at the end of the Ice Age, is one that I think deserves to be given more attention by archaeologists than it has been. Not because I'm saying it, but because those are the facts. We have a global cataclysm, and that global cataclysm occurs at the very origins, at the very moment when archaeologists think that civilization starts to begin. I prefer to see it as a restart or a reboot of civilization.
Yes.
So what would the consequences be? A less arrogant future human, future humans who regard the past with a more open mind, who don't regard the path that we have taken as the only legitimate path. That there are other ways that civilizations can evolve and develop. I think it would help us to control our hubris, to make us less confident in ourselves. And that's a good thing, because our overconfidence in ourselves is one of the reasons that we're making such a mess of the world today.
And the concrete reminder that we can go extinct as a species, right? That's also... We
can go extinct as a species at any time, and any civilization can be lost. I mean, we imagine that our civilization is very strong and completely impossible to destroy or be lost, but I beg to differ. I think our civilization is very weak. I think it's very fragile. The millions, countless, hundreds of millions of people, billions of people in the world today actually have no idea as individuals how to survive. We all depend on this complex network of skills and abilities that society creates. We are psychologically adapted to stability, to the feeling that we're here for the long haul. And a sudden cataclysmic event, whether it's the result of a cosmic impact, an asteroid or a comet hitting the Earth, or whether it's the result of some sort of horrific pandemic, the ingredients are there to bring our civilization down, to end our civilization. And we are psychologically fragile, and I do not think that we would survive the kind of cataclysm that occurred during the Younger Dryas. I think our civilization would be gone, and it would be the people who would survive would be the hunter-gatherers who still exist in the world today, whether in the Amazon rainforest, whether in the Namibian deserts. These are people who are in the business of survival. They are the ones who would survive, and that's precisely what I'm suggesting happened at the end of the Ice Age, that there were hunter-gatherers coexisting in the world with a more advanced type of civilization. The more advanced civilization went down, there were survivors, and smartly they took refuge amongst hunter-gatherers and shared with them some of their knowledge, just as the hunter-gatherers shared their knowledge with the survivors of the lost civilization. It's all a hypothesis, of course.
Yeah.
Not a fact. I'm not claiming this as a fact. I'm putting this forward as a working hypothesis.